Good morning. It's good to be here. The elders have asked me to announce at 6 o'clock tonight we're going to have a claustrophobic elevator riders support group meeting on the 10th floor of the hotel. And we're all going to meet at the bottom of the stairs and make our way up. I'm waiting for the feedback sheet, more stairs. We got on the elevator this morning and Jacob said, "We can fit 17 in here." I told him, "Not with me in here, you're not." I think I hurt his feelings, but we made it through it okay. First of all, I want to thank all the brethren for the opportunity to be here, for the opportunity and the privilege to speak, for the confidence that you've invested in me, and I appreciate Brother David Menson's encouragement this morning. Don't blow it. So that's our objective this morning. Don't blow it. And as was stated, we're going to be going through some things that you're going to have to stop and think a little bit. And I may say some things and stop and just pause and look for a head nod. If you're a head nodder, please nod your head. Because if you don't, we'll be here all morning because I'm not going to move on until I see a head nod. So please be sure that you involve yourself in the sermon and involve yourself in the study. And so let's jump on the bus and get going. We're going to talk about what is truth. But we're going to make a case for what is objective truth. Now, one of the things that we're going to have to do today is to define a lot of terms. So let's just jump right into that. First of all, let's get a definition of truth. Whenever we consider truth, there's all different types of theories about truth and all different types of definitions about truth. But we need a definition from which to begin our study this morning. There's a definition from the Oxford Dictionary. I like to use the Oxford Dictionary because Oxford just has that word it's a word of credibility. That whenever people hear Oxford, they think, well, that's got to be smart because of Oxford University over in England. It's the quality of being true in accordance with fact or reality. And then there are some sub-definitions. That which is true or in accordance with fact or reality, or a fact or belief that is accepted as true. Whenever we look at truth, there are two different categories of truth. There is the category of truth that is a fact or a belief that is accepted as true. We just generally accept it as true. We may not have any evidence of it. We may not have any physical representation of it, but just by our own reasoning and our own logic, we just accept it as true, based upon our opinions and our understandings and our beliefs. But then there's another type of truth, that is that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. Understand the word reality. That's what we're going to emphasize today. In other words, there is a reality that exists that this proposition is a true representation of that. In other words, I'm wearing a black jacket this morning. That's a statement of truth because there is a reality in order to give credence to the proposition, I'm wearing a black jacket this morning. And so we need to understand the importance of reality whenever it comes to understanding truth. The two categories of truth are, number one, subjective truth. Subjective truth is truth that is based or influenced by our personal feelings, our taste, or our opinions. And then there is objective truth. The truth that we're trying to make the case for this morning is truth that's not influenced by my personal feelings, it's not influenced by my opinion, and it's not influenced by anything that I believe. In other words, it's a fact that exists in reality that whether I like it or not, I've got to accept it. It is objective. And so we want to clarify these two terms. So shake your head if you can kind of see the difference between subjective and objective. And what we're interested in this morning is objective truth. So here's an illustration. Let's say that a man is sitting out under a tree and he's looking at the moon and he's contemplating the question, is the moon full? So he looks up at the moon and he agrees, okay, the moon is full. Is the answer to that question a subjective answer? That the moon is full because this person has some personal feelings, has some taste or opinions about full moons. Maybe he proposed to his wife whenever there was a full moon. Or maybe he just thinks that full moons make the sky look so much prettier. And so since he has this affinity for full moons, every time he looks at the moon, he sees a full moon, whether it's a full moon or not, because he just loves full moons. Or is the moon full because of the nature and the reality of the object? In other words, is this truth determined by the subject or by the object? And we all know the truth is determined by the reality of the object. That's called objective truth. And if that guy wants to sit underneath the tree and argue all day long that that is a crescent moon or that is a half moon because he just doesn't like full moons, we're going to look at him and think, you're crazy. Because there's an object in the sky, there's a reality that's staring you right in the face that says the moon is full. So that is objective truth. It's truth that has to be accepted on the nature and the reality of the object. And it's not subjective. In other words, the truth to that question doesn't come from within me, it comes from the reality of the object. Let's talk about something more profound, chocolate ice cream. If I were to ask you the question, is chocolate the best flavor of ice cream? Now think for a moment before I answer this. There's people already shaking their heads, yes it is. Is that an objective question or is that a subjective question? Subjective, very good. That's a subjective question. That's a question whose answer is based upon your personal feelings, your taste, and your opinions about ice cream. So that's a subjective question. And we're going to have all kinds of different answers. Some are going to say chocolate, some are going to say vanilla, some are going to say mocha frappuccino latte, all those other different types of ice cream. And really, we're not going to have any argument over it because we understand that's up to personal taste. But let's consider the next question. Is chocolate ice cream a good treatment for diabetes? Is that an objective question or a subjective question? That's objective. Because it doesn't matter how much I love chocolate ice cream, and it doesn't matter how good I feel when I eat chocolate ice cream, and I may think that it's just doing a world of good for me when I eat chocolate ice cream. There's a reality. The chocolate ice cream is full of sugar. There's a reality. My insulin in my body is not working right. And so as much as I want to feel like it's a good remedy for diabetes, the fact of the matter is it's not. That's objective. So are we seeing the delineation between an objective truth and a subjective truth? So here's the question. Is there objective truth that transcends the physical world? Now, I want to qualify our question a little bit this morning because everybody believes there is objective truth. The moon is full. That's an objective truth. Chocolate ice cream doesn't cure diabetes. That's an objective truth. You ask anybody anywhere and they're going to agree there is objective truth. But the question is there an objective truth that transcends the physical world? In other words, there's not an object in this world that I can point to as a reality that says that this is true. In other words, I've got to look beyond this world for a reality to give credibility to my truth assertion. And that's what transcend means. We'll look at the definition in a moment. Transcend just simply means out of this world. Now that's where we get the rub. Because while many people will agree there is objective truth, I believe in gravity. Gravity is an objective truth. But do you believe it's wrong to steal? What object in the world can we point to that gives us the reality to answer that question? Do you believe that a homosexual lifestyle is acceptable? What reality can we point to in this physical world that gives us the answer to that question? And the idea is those are subjective questions. There's no real world reality, so those questions are subject to your personal feelings, taste, and opinions. You've got your truth, I've got my truth. Let's just tolerate each other and all get along. In other words, is there a reality that transcends the physical world by which the character and the nature of it determines good and evil, right and wrong? That moon that we looked at earlier, the nature of that moon determined that it was a full moon. Well, is there a reality somewhere else that determines the rightness or the wrongness of something? Whether something is good or evil? Or is good and evil, right and wrong, subject to the personal tastes, feelings, and opinions of an individual or a society? In other words, is there transcendent objective truth? In other words, objective truth is not determined by something physical in this world, but something that's determined by a reality that's out of this world. Y'all kind of see where we're going with this? Is there a God? If there's not a God, there's no objective truth. But if there is a God, that means that there is a reality that exists And I have to acknowledge that that reality exists, and I have to acknowledge the nature and character of that reality, just like I've got to acknowledge the nature and the character and the reality of that full moon that we looked at. That what that object determines about the moon, that reality determines about truth. And then there's the definition of transcendent, that it means existing apart from and not subject to the limitations of the material universe. Now, if you'll notice, so far this morning we haven't used a Bible verse. Because if I'm making an argument to a skeptic and I pull out my Bible and said, well, see here, Jesus says in the book of John, thy word is truth. And he looks at me and says, I don't believe in the Bible. Well, okay. God said his word was truth. I don't believe in God. How are we going to argue this now? I don't believe in truth. So before we can talk about God and Bible, we have to understand that there is a truth that gives credibility to the search out of God and the search out of the Bible for truth. So whenever we look at transcendent, what we're asking is there a reality outside of the physical universe that determines the truth by which we are to live and operate by in this world? And so that would be objective truth. That object would be that reality. You and I call him God. But again, we can't, that's why I'm the first speaker. And somebody else is going to talk about God. We just want to understand that there's a reality out there. And that's what we're trying to show. Okay, let's look at our illustration again. Can I take someone's ice cream without their consent? That's a moral question. That's a right or wrong question. That's a good, evil question. Can I take someone's ice cream without their consent? Is the answer to that question subject to an individual or society's personal feelings, taste, and opinions? So I'm the guy sitting under the tree. I like chocolate ice cream and I don't have any. But that guy does. And you know that guy's got a lot of money. He can buy all the chocolate ice cream that he wants. So in my opinion, he doesn't need that chocolate ice cream. But I do. Therefore, by my truth, it's going to be okay to take that chocolate ice cream from him. That's an example of subjective truth in regard to a moral question. It's based on personal feelings, beliefs, and taste and opinions. Or is the answer to that question determined by the existence of a transcendent reality? In other words, is there a reality outside of the physical world that determines the truth of that question? Is there a reality in existence whose nature and character determines that it's wrong to steal? And even though I like ice cream, and even though I may think that guy has too much ice cream, and even though I may think that guy won't miss his ice cream, it's still wrong for me to take his ice cream. That would be the case. That would be an example of an objective truth. So there are two types of truth, objective and subjective. Objective truth is truth regardless of anyone's personal feelings, taste, and opinions. It recognizes a transcendent reality that all individuals in society must regard and respect. Subjective truth is truth that's determined by personal feelings, taste, and opinions. And since our feelings, taste, and opinions differ, truth differs between individuals and societies. And you have your truth, and I have my truth. How many of you have heard that before? Well, that's your truth. Well, that's just what you think. That's just what you believe. I've got what I think, and I've got what I believe, and what I think and believe is just as good as what you think and believe. That's an example of subjective truth. But what we want to acknowledge today is that there is objective truth. There is truth that supersedes our personal feelings, taste, and opinions. That I have to accept it regardless of how I feel and think and believe about it. Because there's a reality that determines otherwise. And it's just as ridiculous to say that you have your truth and I have my truth about this moral question as it is to say that you have your truth and I have my truth about the law of gravity. We all have to agree with that. You know, and there's some times that we may not want to believe that there's gravity as we're falling off of something. But the fact remains it's still there. And so we're going to make a case for objective truth. We're going to use what's called an indirect proof. And we're going to look at this question philosophically. Again, because we're trying to prove something that's transcendent, that's out of this world, so we don't want to use things of this world to try to make our case. So we're going to try to do it philosophically. And don't cringe and think, oh no, you see a Latin word up there and you hear the word philosophy and it makes you just want to crawl under your chair. But don't think that. All philosophy is a pursuit of wisdom. And that's what we're all about. We're all philosophers in some sense because we're interested in the pursuit of wisdom. The only difference is modern day philosophers want to speculate about the way things could be, but what we want to know is how are things actually existing right now? An indirect proof is a proof or a mode of argumentation that seeks to establish a contention by deriving an absurdity from its denial, thus arguing that a thesis must be accepted because its rejection would be untenable. How's that for 8:30 in the morning? But again, we put this up here. Dr. Nicholas Rescher, he's a distinguished university professor of philosophy at the University of Pittsburgh. And we use these definitions because when we're talking to people, we want people to understand we're not making up these rules. We're not making up these rules. I'm not making up an indirect proof because an indirect proof is going to work real good for what I want to do. An indirect proof is a legitimate way of proving something in the philosophical community. So for those of us down south, it just simply means that we're going to take the statement, there is no objective truth, and we're going to look at that. And we're going to test it. And if there is no objective truth is not true, then we must accept the fact that there is objective truth. And we're not making these rules up. The rules that we're going to use come from a man by the name of Aristotle. How many of you have heard of Aristotle? Aristotle wrote some of the basic principles that are used in logic and philosophy for today. One of his principles says that no proposition, or it's called the law of non-contradiction, no proposition may be simultaneously true and false. In other words, something can't be true and false at the same time. It's either true or false. If it's not true, it's got to be false. If it's false, it can't be true. And then there is the law of the excluded middle, that every proposition must be either true or false. That's not hard, is it? We're sitting there thinking, this is supposed to be hard. But it's not hard. Something's either true or false. There's no maybes. Like whenever we were in grade school and we had that girlfriend or boyfriend that we really, really liked, we'd write them a note. Do you like me? Yes or no? Circle one. And then we always put what? No maybes. No maybes. You didn't know whenever you were in elementary school trying to get the interest of a young girl or a young boy, you were using Aristotelian logic. Wow. So you knew about Aristotelian logic whenever you were in grade school. Again, this isn't rocket science. And sometimes the philosophers want us to make it think that, well, it's logic and philosophy that's beyond the normal mind. Well, no, it's not beyond a third grader's mind. First of all, we're going to look at the statement, there is no objective truth. And what I want us to understand is that one absurdity that I see in the statement, there is no objective truth, is that it is self-contradicting. It's self-contradicting. There is no objective truth. And we're going to use what's called the Wile E. Coyote method of logic. The Wile E. Coyote method. If you've ever watched the cartoons where he's chasing after the Roadrunner, every time he sets a trap, what happens? It always comes back on him, doesn't it? I saw an episode the other day, just in passing. I didn't sit down and watch. But I noticed, even after all these years, he still hasn't learned not to play with anvils and TNT. Because it always comes back on him. And whenever you're dealing with philosophical issues, one way of reasoning about them is to take the assertion that somebody gives you and just throw it right back on them. Because a lot of times, things that we want to impose on everybody else, things that we think work for everybody else, whenever we turn them back on ourselves, they don't actually make a whole lot of sense. So, there is no objective truth. So let's say that we're talking to that professor like was in the movie. Well, let's just ask, oh, I got a question. Is your assertion that there is no objective truth, is that subject to my personal or society's feelings, taste, and opinions and beliefs? Well, no, it's not. There is no objective truth is a proposition or an assertion that everybody has to accept regardless of their personal feelings, taste, and opinions. Okay. So then what you're telling me is there is no objective truth is an objective truth. Okay, this is where we pause so you can stop and kind of soak that in a little bit. So by the definition of objective, what you're telling me is the proposition there is no objective truth is an objective truth. Well, let's look at it. Let's just make this as simple as we possibly can. Let's look at this quantitatively. In other words, let's put some numbers here. Let's look at the statement. There is no objective truth. What's the numerical value for no? 0. And means what? It has to be at least 1. And what does the word is mean? 1 plus 1 is 2. Is means equals. Equals. So if you're going to tell me that there is no objective truth is an objective truth, you might as well be telling me that 0 equals 1. Now does that make sense? Remember we talked about absurdity? Absurdity is something that is unreasonable and ridiculous. And again, that's not our definition and that's not our proof or test, but that good doctor from the University of Pittsburgh tells us that that's what we ought to believe. And so whenever we look at the statement, there is no objective truth, in the very beginning, whenever you throw that back on itself, it's self-contradictory. Asserting that there is no objective truth creates a quantitative absurdity, and so we have to reject the assertion that there is no objective truth, and so based on the laws of non-contradiction and based on the law of the excluded middle, what do we have to agree to? There is objective truth. Because the statement there is no objective truth is a self-contradiction. That'd be like me standing up here saying, oh, I get so frustrated sometimes because I just can't speak English. Yeah? Everybody's talking, what? My statement in and of itself is a self-contradiction. Because I spoke English when I said I couldn't speak English. And so if I'm saying that there is no objective truth is an objective truth, I'm stating an objective truth when I say there is no objective truth. Are you following? Please shake your head. Okay, thank you, Ashley. So we can reject it on the premise that it's self-contradicting. Now, whenever you try to disprove something, whenever you disprove it, one proof against is all you need. I'm a math teacher. Whenever we try to prove things, if we're trying to prove something mathematical, we don't have to have 4, 5, 6, 7 proofs for it. One proof is good enough. So we could stop here if we wanted to, but I still got more time, so we'll keep going. The statement can't be argued. Somebody that doesn't believe that there is objective truth really has no grounds to make an argument for that which they believe. There is no objective truth. Okay, let's ask the question. Is your assertion subject to my personal or society's feelings, tastes, and opinions? Well, when he answered yes, that didn't work out too good. So now we're going to answer no. No, it's not. It's not. I know that 0 doesn't equal 1, so when I said yes, that made an absurdity. So I'm going to have to, or when I answered no, that created an absurdity. So this time I'm going to answer yes. So then by definition, you're saying that there is no objective truth, it's not an objective truth, and therefore I'm not under any obligation to believe it. If it's subject to my personal feelings, tastes, and opinions and beliefs, I believe that there is objective truth. So I don't have to believe what you're trying to feed me. And really, you're being disrespectful of me because you're trying to convince me to believe something that I don't want to believe. You're being intolerant of me. You see, one of the reasons for arguments, or one of the purpose for argument, again, from the University of Maryland, from their philosophical department, an argument is to change people's points of view or persuade them to accept new points of view. To persuade people to a particular action or a new behavior. And then they go on to say that since people don't always agree on what's right or reasonable, appropriately constructed arguments help us to arrive at what's fair and true. So if I'm going to try to change you or to persuade you to my way of thinking, what am I in essence saying? My way of thinking is better than yours. That there is some moral superiority to my belief than to your belief. But if there is no objective truth, if you have your truth and I have my truth, and we're to be tolerant of each other's truths, and we're to be respectful of each other's truth, then wouldn't my attempt to try to change your truth be an assertion that your truth is not right, fair, reasonable, or acceptable? And it blows in the whole face and the whole meaning of saying that there is no objective truth. That has just simply come about because we're tired of the conflicts of trying to find out what real truth is. Let's just let everybody believe what everybody wants to believe and get along with each other. But as soon as that professor tries to convince you there is no objective truth, he's assuming a position of moral superiority over you. He's making a judgment about you, doing the very things that his philosophy condemns, taking morally superior positions and making judgments. So to argue for there is no objective truth would imply some grounds for believing it is morally superior to there is an objective truth. However, without an objective moral standard, how can any argument be made that one belief is morally superior to another? That one belief is right and another belief is wrong? That one belief is fair and another belief is unfair? That one belief is good and another belief is bad? How can you make those arguments about good and bad, fair, unfair, right, wrong, reasonable, unreasonable, if there is no objective standard, transcendent standard for us to all respect and agree to? You know, people that believe that there's no objective truth, people that are relativists, I think I get it out, should be some of the most peaceful and amiable people you've ever been around. Because nothing bothers them. But yet you'll find they're some of the most militant people to be around as they try to advance their doctrines of tolerance on you and me, all the while they're intolerant to what we think and believe. They can't make an argument. So we're going to reject this as an absurdity by saying to argue for a position that the other person is not obligated to accept, especially if you argue a position that purports one belief is as good as another, then that's absurd. So we'll reject it on that ground. The last thing that I want to look at is that the statement, there is no objective truth, precludes any interpersonal or any intersocietal moral judgments. If we have two people arguing and debating, and there is no moral objective truth, as we just got through talking in the last point, there's really no way to argue, since there is not an agreed upon standard of right, wrong, good, evil. And so these two individuals can't make a moral judgment. They can't have a debate. They can't make an argumentation. They can say what they think, they can say what they feel, they can say what their opinion is, but they can't argue factually and truthfully for the beliefs that they hold. And my assertion is, if we can't make moral judgments individually, then we can't make moral judgments between societies. Because if I can't judge on a micro level, how can I judge on a macro level? In other words, if those two people can't judge each other and say one is wrong and one is right, one is good, one is evil, then how can one society say that one is right and one is wrong and one is good and one is evil? So let's take this society of people here. And this society of people has a belief. And their belief is we hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And then on the other side of the world, there's a society that says only a member of the race can be a citizen. A member of the race can only be of one who is of German blood, without consideration or creed. Consequently, no Jew can be a member of the race. So this society believes that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. This society believes that only those people who are of German descent can be part of the race, and if you're a Jew, you can't be part of a race. How can this society say that that society is wrong? This society is just doing what they believe in based upon their experiences and their beliefs and their opinions and their personal feelings. This society over here is doing what they do based on their experiences, their beliefs, their opinions, and their personal feelings. If there is no transcendent reality that defines for us what's morally good and morally evil, what moral authority or what authority does this society have to say that that society is wrong? And we look at that and we say, that just can't be right. That just can't be right. Now, this is called supersizing the argument. You know, we can sit down and we can kind of argue about our little beliefs that we have between us and talk about objective truth, but we're going to supersize the argument. If I can't say that you're wrong and you can't say that I'm wrong, then how can we say that that's wrong? They were just doing what they believed in. Their belief, their opinion, led to the Holocaust. The extermination of over 6 million Jews. Was that wrong? Was it wrong for Hitler to orchestrate the massacre of 6 million Jews? Well, if there's no transcendent moral standard, how can we say he was wrong? Now, people today would say, well, I wouldn't have done that. Oh, well, that's real good. I wouldn't have done that. Well, do you think he was right in doing that? Well, I wouldn't have done that. Well, do you think some way, somehow he was justified in doing? Well, I wouldn't have done that. You see, we become so timid in stating absolutes that there are people who, in response to that question, will tell you, I wouldn't have done it. So you're telling me that somewhere out there, there is a subjective belief system that Hitler was justified in doing what he did to those Jews. Well, I wouldn't have done that. That's absurd. It's absurd. But it is the extreme unreasonable position that no objective truth pushes a person towards. Because if I'm going to make a moral judgment here, then that gives me the liberty to make moral judgments other places. And we don't want to do that because we want to be tolerant. How about this society? This society says, love thine enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to those that despitefully use you. This society over here says, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Take them captives and besiege them and lie in wait for them in every ambush. Kill them wherever you find them. Strike off their heads and strike off every fingertip of them. Are all belief systems equal? Are you going to sit there and tell me that every belief system is equal? If your truth is as good as my truth, then that truth is as good as that truth. That those people were perfectly justifiable whenever they drove those airplanes into those tall buildings. That they are perfectly justifiable whenever they kill and they slaughter innocent people because they don't believe their faith. You see, a lot of times we talk about beliefs. Well, all beliefs are equal. There is no transcendent reality to define what's morally right and morally wrong in regards to our beliefs. But I want you to understand, beliefs have consequences. Beliefs have consequences. And if there is no moral standard for a belief, there is no transcendent reality that defines a moral standard for the consequence. You know, so Hitler may be sitting over there and he's thinking to himself. He's thinking these things, and we look at that. Well, that's just his belief. Okay, what happens when he acts on his belief? What are we going to say then? If we're not going to judge the belief, we can't judge the consequence. Whenever you do away with any transcendent reality that defines good and evil, then whose morality do we follow? And I'll tell you whose morality we follow. We follow the morality of those that have the biggest guns. That's who we follow. Hitler had his morality. We didn't agree with it, so what did we do? We loaded up our guns. And we went over there and we took care of it. Because we found what he was doing morally objectionable. What are those in Islam doing? They're picking up their guns. It's the power of the gun. That's what we're left to. Without any transcendent reality to define for us objective truth. So it's absurd to entertain that in some way, somehow, at some place, and in some time, the most malignant violators of our moral sensitivities could be justified under a subjective truth system. Do any of us want to think in here that it's normal to think that Hitler could have been right? Do we want to think it's normal to think that Osama bin Laden could have been right? That's absurd. That so violates the moral sensitivities that we have that I'm going to reject the statement that there is no objective truth. So as we look at this, there is no objective truth. Number one is self-contradicting. It's self-contradicting. 0 does not equal 1. Now in postmodern thought, if you talk to a deconstructionist, they're going to say, well, what does 1 really mean? You know, you never send a deconstructionist to the grocery store to buy a loaf of bread. Because number one, they don't know if it's the grocery store or not. Or number two, they may come back with a truckload of bread. You know, and that's an argument that is just so glaringly absurd. And that's why philosophy has to be speculative and create ambiguity by saying, well, we don't know what 1 really means. That's the extreme, as we saw on the board. That's the philosophy of the world. The philosophy of the world wants to keep everything speculative. The philosophy of the world wants to create doubt. Because more people desire to live in doubt, because in their minds, doubt means liberty. Doubt means liberty. But truth means there's a standard that I have to live by. And the credibility of that standard is defined by a transcendent reality that goes beyond this physical world that I must respect, that I must regard, and everybody else must respect and must regard also. So I hope that some way, somehow, we have made the case that there is objective truth. And again, we've taken a philosophical approach to it. There are so many other ways. And like I say, there's volumes and volumes that are written about truth. But for just a simple old guy that lives in Arkansas, that's what I look at. That's what I think and that's what I believe. And hopefully that it's given you some insight too. To answer these questions again, you don't have to have a philosophical degree. All you have to have is just a little common sense. I know 0 don't equal 1. I know there's no way that Hitler and Obama could be justifiable. I know that there's no way that you should argue for an argument that no one is obligated to believe. And so we leave the lesson with you, and I appreciate your attention and look forward to any questions that you might submit. And thank you very much. Nancy, I'll turn it over to you.